Hello. In my DGST 301 creative coding class, we're going to be using Python to create poetry and prose. So this video is intended as a general introduction to what Python is. It's not so much an introduction to how to use Python, but more just what Python is and a couple of points about how to use it. I'm going to be demonstrating 3 ways to create Python and recommending the third. The first way is going to be using a terminal or command line. The second way is going to be using a script file. And the third way is going to be using a Python notebook. First of all, this is how you can use Python in a terminal or command line. I don't really recommend this if you haven't used a terminal or command line before, but I think it's a useful way to understand what Python is doing. Python is software, but it's also a programming language. It's software that we can address and instruct using the language of Python. And you probably already have Python installed on your computer. You may not. It doesn't really matter because, like I said a minute ago, I'm going to be recommending a different way of doing it. But if you do have a terminal or a command line on your computer, then this is a good way to try out Python and just see that it works and that it exists. If you don't have this, it's not a big deal. But let me show you what it looks like in my case. I'm on a Linux computer right now, so this is my Bash terminal. If you have a Mac, you have a terminal software, a terminal application you can use, and it'll look very similar to this. Probably a white background with black text, but the same idea where you're typing things and getting a response. So this is the command line environment. I'm not trying to introduce the whole command line environment, but this is where you can do things like print your current working directory. You can do things like make folders. You can show the contents of those folders. There's a whole other video or series of videos that I could make about how to use the terminal, but it's really not important. It's not really the emphasis for this class, at least. But this is a place where we can start seeing what Python is and does. I already have Python installed on this computer. So if I type the word Python, that will invoke Python and will start up the Python interpreter. So you notice that my interpreter used to be this $sign and now it's the 3 angle brackets. This is now the Python interpreter. So whereas before I was talking to Bash or the terminal software to relate to my computer, right now I'm talking to Python. And so I can give Python instructions. I can say things like print hello. This is a classic beginning point. And then I hit enter and it prints hello. That's Python code. So this right here, this is Python code. This is correctly written as syntactically correct Python to accomplish this task of printing the word hello. Very simple. All right, I can also do things like math. I can say, I can actually say, let's say 5 plus 4, right? That's 9. Very simple, and that's ultimately what Python is doing. It's lots of math, lots of string manipulation, which is what this is. The word hello there is a string of characters, and this is Python. So this is one way you can use Python, but it's a little tricky, especially if you're not used to working in a terminal. It's also hard to do long, complex things in this kind of environment because it's just sort of a one-off situation. If you're able to run Python this way, you can try out using Python by typing commands here. But if you don't see Python, if you get something else as a response when you type the word Python, then you might not have it, and you can install it if you want to, but it's not necessary for my students certainly to do that. If you do get Python running, by the way, the way to get out of the terminal is you can exit out of the terminal, but if you want to just exit out of Python, you have to type the word quit with parentheses after it. So this invokes the quit function, and now I'm back to the normal terminal. Another very common way to write Python code is to create a script file. And that's what I usually do when I want Python to do something for me. In this case, I'm going to be writing some Python code in a text editor called Sublime Text. I like it a lot. I recommend it. But any plain text editor will work as long as you save it as a Python file. And you do that just by making sure it ends in whatever you want to call it, .py. And I'll do that here just to show you what that looks like. But just like I did a minute ago, you can ask it to print things. You can ask it to do some math, or I can actually just do math. I'll do it this way: calculation equals, and we'll do some more complex math. I have no idea what this will be. So you write each command on its own line and kind of go down. Python does care a lot about indentation, so these all have to be at the very beginning of the line they're on, and if you want to have things nested, which we'll get into later, they have to be indented according to whatever level of nesting they're doing. This should be a complete Python program. But actually, let me make sure it prints the results of that calculation here whenever I run it. Now, like I said, to save it, you need to make sure that it is a plain text file like this one is. I'm going to do Control S, or actually I'll go here so you can see the menu system. I'll go Save, and I think the pop-up you won't be able to see, so let me tell you what I'm doing. I don't think OBS is going to record this, but I'm going to save this as a file called demo.py, and now you can see the file name in the tab for Sublime Text here. So you can see that as I did that, Sublime Text was like, oh, you're writing Python? I know how Python works, and it color-coded different things that I wrote accordingly. So that's what this is. This is a very basic Python script. Now to actually run this Python script, I am going to need a shell. So let me go here to the shell. This is the one I was just using in the earlier segment, and I'm going to run this Python script from the shell. So let me just make sure I'm in the right place. ls tells me what are the contents of the current directory I'm in, and I can see the demo.py file there. So I need to run that with Python. I'll just say Python, and instead of just saying Python and then running it through the interactive console like that, I'm going to just say Python, I would like for you to process demo.py. And it does, and it says hello Zach, and it gives me the results of that calculation, which is 563. So writing Python in a script file is very useful and convenient, especially if you have something complicated that you want to keep working on until you get it right, or if you have a lot of steps and things that are just too much for you to remember, things like special passwords or other things. That's what I have going in another tab here. I'm doing some interaction with Twitter, and I need to make sure that I have all the settings right, and then I'm tweaking it a little bit, so I don't want to have to rewrite all that every time. It's like 50 lines of code. So this is something that is a very useful way to write Python. Finally, this is what I actually recommend if you're learning Python, and especially if you're in my class and we're working on the poetry and the prose projects this week. This is a Python notebook, and it has the same capabilities in terms of Python as the command line and the script file method, but this is all hosted in a Google server in this case because I'm using Google Collaboratory. And the nice thing about the notebook environment is that you can try different versions of the same code alongside each other. You can also add notes to yourself or explanations to other people who will be looking at your code. And it's a very convenient way to package all that together and share it with someone. So I really like that. I'll do a whole other video about Colab notebooks. But this is Python, and this is the same thing that I was doing before. So we can do all the same things that we did. Hello, Zach. In this environment, you can click the play button or shift enter to process a bit of code, and then it runs it like that. And there we go, we see the output right there. So we can also do very long, complicated things, kind of like we did with the script file. Let's do some more math here. I don't know what I'm doing here, but you can see the idea. And then let's print calc. Let's print the results of that calculation in the next thing here. So there's a problem. What did I do wrong? So what we're seeing here is a nice thing about. Okay, I guess it didn't like me leaving that number with a 0. That's the nice thing about Python. Python has pretty good error messages like you just saw there, and we see those in the console here, and we can just fix that. That's the nice thing about working in a Colab notebook too, is like if you run something and you get an error, you can share it with me, then I can see the error and hopefully explain how to fix it if I can figure it out. But this is Colab notebooks. The notebook way of doing things, there's another method or an earlier method that a lot of people have used called IPython, and then later it became Jupyter notebooks. And Colab is relatively new, but I find it very convenient because of the sharing. So this is the notebook environment. Like I said, I'll do more of a video explaining how to work with Colab notebook, but this is Python. That was a very quick and very shallow introduction to Python, but hopefully it helps get you started. If you want to learn more about Python, there are lots of great resources. LearnPython.org is a great one. W3schools.com has a good Python tutorial. There's quite a few. And honestly, once you get the basic vocabulary of how Python works, Googling and seeing what you can find that's how I learn things. So I recommend it to you as well. Hopefully that was helpful. If you're in my class, you should definitely watch the next video, which I'm going to make about Colab notebooks. Otherwise, whoever you are, thanks for watching.